again, Jude, and over to you.
Thank you, Richard. And it's so lovely to be with you and Renee and Peter and everyone. Your evening, my morning. I'm bathed in sunrise light at the moment, so it may look a little strange, but that's what it is. I don't have a spotlight on me other than the best spotlight in the universe, our beloved sun. So I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, you've been getting lots of prana, which is the main thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, what we've agreed is that I'll present for about 45 minutes today. It might be a little less even, but what that does is it'll give us some good time to sort of have some, not just question and answers, but some reflections from everyone who's on the call. So I'm looking forward to that. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And I'm going to hopefully start now. So as Richard was saying, the title today is Our Conscious Revolution. And I'd like to, as I go through my presentation, explain why I put the R, because we'd normally talk about our conscious evolution. But for me, this moment of potential is so revolutionary that I really want to sort of express it in those terms. You know, we've all been coming along journey really to this point. The times are very turbulent at this point. There's a lot of polarization at this point. And so for many people, that is very challenging. Of course, there are conflicts that are tragic, which of course is heartbreaking. But, you know, what I'm feeling myself is that we're on the threshold of our conscious revolutionary leap, not despite that turbulence, but almost because of it. And I use an analogy rather than a meta crisis, which is often how, you know, the environmental issues, the polarization issues, all the that we're all very aware of, is rather like, instead of a meta crisis, a metamorphosis. Because when a caterpillar has come to the end of its cycle of life and goes into a chrysalis, it breaks down, it dissolves. And in that dissolution, from that dissolution, because of that dissolution, an emergent butterfly is beginning to form. And the immune system of the dissolving caterpillar fights the emergent imaginal cells of the becoming butterfly. And it makes a butterfly stronger. It makes it more able to then, at the end of its forming, of its new body, it can leave the chrysalis. And then, as butterflies often do, they break from the chrysalis in the early morning. And they do that just as I'm bathing in the rays of our beloved soul rise, then butterflies do the same. And it's those solar rays, that prana, those solar rays, that dry the wings, the bedraggled early wings of the butterfly, so that they dry out, so they stretch out and enable the butterfly to fly, literally, to become a pollinator, rather than rather than the caterpillar eating everything in sight, to a joyous pollinator, bringing joy and new life to flowers. So let's perhaps feel we can begin to reframe where we are and realize that the turbulence is a birthing process for us as an emergent, not new species, but radically changed and revolutionary emergent humanity. So that was the revolution. And why here, why now? I'll explain why I'm sensing this. I did a little bit just now, because we are here and we are now in this moment of choice, this moment where we can choose to go on as we have done, but would we really want to, given what we are experiencing and the potential of what we are experiencing, not just the turbulence and the challenge, but I do also appreciate that we are, in each of our lives, I hope, also feeling a sense of possibility, a sense of emergence. I'll come back to that at the end, because I was at a very special event up in London yesterday, and I'm involved with various other things that I'd like to share after the presentation as we go forward, and perhaps see how we might really perceive and act together to transform this meta-crisis into truly a metamorphosis. So as Richard kindly said, I'm also the author of my two most recent books, so The Cosmic Hologram and The Story of Gaia. And it's really both of those that I'm presenting from tonight, because this is the story of the emergent understanding of literally a living and loving universe that meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves from simplicity to ever greater levels of complexity and individuated self-awareness, a deeply interdependent, unitive universe. So that'll be the story that I'll be sharing tonight, because this is the underpinning, the framing and the background and the path of which we've come as universal beings, as universal human beings, for the last nearly 14 billion years. So when I speak of our conscious revolution, I'm speaking of our revolution as individuated, microcosmic co-creators of a living, loving, and evolutionary universe. So let's go forward. And just to say, and this is where, if you're interested in the work that I'm sharing today and this understanding, this is the place to go to it, wholeworld-view.org. Lots of free resources there. Uh-oh. Hold on a second. Here we go. Bear with me, folks. Here we go. So, the big breath and the evolutionary journey of our conscious universe, our conscious planet, and us. This is a slight paraphrase of the subtitle to the story of Gaia, because we're all taught, I guess, that our universe began as a big bang. And I'll come to that later, because I had an incredible synchronicity yesterday that I want to share. But, you know, we know it wasn't big, it was tiny, but we also now know as cosmologists that it didn't begin as in the implied chaos of a bang. Instead, it was exquisitely fine-tuned and ordered, then and ever since. And that enabled it to be this exploratory evolutionary arc for the last nearly 14 billion years. So I describe this as the first moment of an ongoing big breath. And this reflects the ancient Indian tradition and many other wisdom teachings of our universe being essentially the breath of the divine. So this is our story. Now, in the past, in the last 400 years, we began a journey where science, and it wasn't called science then, it was called natural philosophy. And the early proponents and pioneers of it were not called scientists, they were called natural philosophers, because they had a love of knowledge, and it was the love of the knowledge of the natural world. And so they were able to undertake a journey that was based on a methodology, what's known as empirical investigation. In other words, experimentation. So they weren't just observing, they were also experimenting. And of course, one of the first great proponents of this was Isaac Newton. But it was revealing progressively a universe. And of course, at that time, they could only explore the natural world, so-called natural world. They were absolutely forbidden by the very powerful and authoritarian church at the time to bring anything spiritual in. That was the purview of the church. Anything to do with religion and spirituality was not to be investigated. But that really meant, and as we look back later in my presentation, it literally pulled the rug out of their discoveries and experiments, because it literally was saying that you only can look at the natural world. And progressively, that became a separation from the deeper spirituality of the nature of the whole world. And so science became progressively more materialistic. And in that materialism, and with the tools available at the time, and with the methodology of reductionism, scientists were trying to pull apart things to see what they were made up of. Now, that's helpful, but it's not the whole story. And if you take it to its extreme, it actually becomes very problematic. So we ended up at the end of the 19th century with a materialistic, mechanistic science of separate stuff, of things, and a very limited cosmology, because even then the telescopes and the microscopes were not good enough to really reveal the wonder, the grandeur of our universe as we perceive it today. And of course, computers weren't around either. So we ended up with the 19th century science of mechanisms and stuff and things. But as all good science comes to a point, the discoveries and the evidence that's being found tends to be either in line with current theory, or it isn't in line with current theory, in which the great scientific way is to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And that always hasn't been the case, but that is the real path. That is the North Star. That is the clear compass of science, to follow the evidence wherever it leads. So at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, discoveries were being made that were anomalous to that mechanistic worldview. The discoveries of the quantum physicists, the discoveries of Einstein, the understanding that energy and matter is equivalent, that it is fundamentally in wave form. It particularizes as frozen waves, but nonetheless, its wave particle nature was something that could not be understood in that mechanistic perspective. It was also showing that an observer, when a measurement is taken, certainly at the quantum scale, that changes the manifestation of that phenomenon. But what was realized by the pioneers of quantum physics is that for quantum physics to work at all, then our entire universe had to be unitive, unified, non-locally entangled, as it's called. So that was opening a huge can of worms, because when you understand that, you start to understand that you cannot just understand our universe at this material manifested level of its appearance. And of course, Einstein was making incredible discoveries too, and realizing that space, the measurement of a spatial event is different between observers. The measure of a time, a temporal event, is different between observers. But he went beyond that, because we often stop at that point to go, space is relative, time is relative. Yes, but that's not the whole story. We need to go, and Einstein understood this. We have to bring space and time together as space-time. So when we measure an event, we have to measure not just 3 dimensions in space, but we also have to point it in time. And when we have those 4 dimensions of a phenomenon, anyone, any being, anywhere, through time, through space, measures the same event. And that is vital, because if that was not the case, we would not have a universe that can exist and evolve in its wholeness, that can begin nearly 14 billion years ago and have an arrow of time and a causality running through space-time, and yet be wholly unitive. So here we are. We've come a long way since my hero, Isaac Newton, all the way to now. And what's now happening is, even then, the science of 20th century, so the quantum physics of the 20th century, of energy and matter, and the relativity physics of the 20th century of space-time, are themselves needing to go to a whole next level of understanding, because we've not been able to bring them together. And we've seen that the world of the very small is the quantum world. We've seen the world of the large is the world of relativity, of space and time. But they're not separate. They're conjoined. And they are conjoined as the appearance of a whole universe, a unitive universe that literally exists and evolves to get in its wholeness. So scientific breakthroughs at all scales of existence are enabling this unitive perspective. And what they're showing is the appearance of energy, matter, and space-time is not the deeper levels of causative consciousness, mind, cosmic mind, universal mind, underlying and co-creating this wonderful world that we all experience in our earth walk as human beings. And although it was ushered in by quantum physics and relativity, it's only now, because we're realizing the most fundamental role of information and what's called the holographic principle, that we're able to take these next steps into a much deeper understanding of the nature of reality, and one that is converging with universal wisdom teachings and indigenous teachings, and is fundamentally a reality that is innately spiritual, having this manifest material expression. So it's based on, as many of the quantum physicists and Einstein himself understood, and I would argue that Newton too, because he was rather the last alchemist than the first natural philosopher in that sense. But it's an emergent understanding that is based on the primacy of mind and consciousness. Crucially, vitally, cosmic mind. We are microcosms, but we're not the whole. We are microcosms, fractals, cells of this wholeness. And this, of course, is so convergent with theosophical teachings, which is why I'm so grateful to be here with you all, because this is like, I'm so happy because we're now coming together with this deeper understanding and able to share it and bring science in the leading edge of its discoveries into this wonderful perspective. But what we're finding is cosmic mind articulated as digitized and vitally meaningful information. I've been told I have an obsession with a hyphen. I do, because what I really want to stress is we're talking about meaningful information. We're not talking about random data. We're talking about from the ones and zeros of the most fundamental pixelation of our universe at the tiniest scale, which I'll go on to explain. Our entire universe is made up of digitized information, and it's represented through dynamic. This is not static. Everything is relational movement from the very first moment to now and beyond through the entire life cycle of our universe. So this information, this underpinning of meaningful information, which is the articulation of cosmic and universal mind and consciousness, literally informs the formation of our entire universe, from atoms to molecules to stars and galaxies and black holes to planets and to plants and to people. And the evidence, and this all fits together. This isn't something that you have to sort of try and shoehorn in. What this emergent understanding is so important, it seems to me, is it can be expressed very simply. As far as physics goes, it can be explained extremely simply by bringing the 3 laws of thermodynamics, which we were taught at school. Some of us were just taught there were 2, there are 3, and the third's really important. But to expand those in terms of information, so energy, matter, taken to a deeper level, as meaningful information expressed as energy, matter, and space-time expressed as at a deeper level as meaningful information in complementary ways. They then can expand the 2 laws of thermodynamics into showing how our universe can exist and evolve. And I'm not going to go into that today because that's very sciencey, but it's really important because it ultimately, as far as a cosmologist would say, is extremely simple. But it therefore can explain the whole universe. But it needs one further thing. It needs a 3rd law because that drives the life cycle. But it also needs what's called the holographic principle. And the holographic principle was a universal understanding that came from the study of black holes. And in the study of black holes, it was realized that when a big star explodes, it doesn't explode in that sense. It's so powerful that its gravitational infall collapse at the end of its lifetime can't be stopped. It's so powerful. So it doesn't explode like a supernova. It keeps on collapsing beyond what's called an event horizon, which is the point at which even light can't escape. The gravitational impulse is so powerful. So it's called a black hole. But then the question was, what happens to all the information? What happens to all the understanding, the experience, the information that star has accrued over its life cycle? And the understanding is it is actually held on the surface of that event horizon. Now, you'd think that because the star was 3-dimensional during its life, that information will be proportional to that three-dimensional volume of that event horizon, because the event horizon is spherical, because it's just the spherical star as it collapses. It's just like its surface, as it were, but it's still the spherical volume of that collapse. But no, the information isn't proportional to that three-dimensional volume. It's proportional to the two-dimensional surface area. Now, when we understood that, we went, okay, that rings a bell, because holograms do the same thing. When a light is shone off an object and reflected back and then shone through, projected forward, it's projected through a two-dimensional pattern of information taken from that three-dimensional object to then project into a 3D hologram. But it's that two-dimensional pattern which holds all the information gathered from that original object, whether it's an apple, whether it's a person. So we expanded that understanding to the whole of our universe to appreciate that all the information expressed as space-time and energy matter, the appearance of our universe, is projected holographically from its boundary. And all the theories, all the ways of supporting the evidence that's coming forward are pointing to this. So there's it's almost like this is the direction of travel. However surreal it sounds, it doesn't mean our universe is any less real. It just means that this is the way the cosmic mind creates the great thoughts that we call universes. And it's pixelated at the minute Planck scale, as I mentioned. And that Planck scale is as small as to an atom as an atom is to the whole universe. So this isn't just theory. This is also all the discoveries that are being made. And we found what's called the fractal signature, because we find the patterns of what I call the cosmic hologram as fractal patterns that scale up and scale down from the scale of atoms, through the scale of planets, through the scale of solar systems, through the scale of galaxies, through the scale of galactic clusters, to the whole of space-time. Excuse me. And this is a temperature map of the whole of space, and it's of the relic radiation called the CMB, the cosmic microwave background that fills the whole of space. It was created when space was much smaller, as the universe was much younger. But as space has continued to expand, this relic radiation has continued to fill the whole of space. So what you see in the colors, the color differences are tiny, tiny, tiny little temperature differences. And if you analyze them through a computer, you'll see that they're fractal. So they're actually showing the characteristic patterns of the cosmic hologram. And in 2018, scientists were able to prove what I mentioned earlier, that our whole universe is universally whole, unitive, non-locally entangled. And they did that by, as this experiment showed, entangling laboratory photons with starlight and quasar, which is a very active galactic center, as far away as 12.2 billion light years. That gives us a scale of the universe. So what we're showing is that those tiny quantum phenomena aren't just tiny. They're representative of a universe that itself exists and evolves as a unitive entity, a great thought form. Within space-time, nothing can go faster than the speed of light. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. When we go first back, nearly 14 billion years, that first moment of the big breath, our universe was not just so exquisitely fine-tuned, but incredibly ordered. So from that order, ever since, the continuing, it has enabled the flow of time, because our universe wasn't just incredibly ordered, it was at its lowest informational content, which is when we expand to infodynamics or information dynamics. It's the information content of the universe that is key to its evolutionary progress. So that very first moment, it was the lowest information content, just as a newborn baby. And ever since, it's increased its information content as space has expanded and time has flowed forward. That's the way that our evolutionary arc has continued. And of course, in 2022, some of you may know that the Nobel Prize was given to 3 researchers who had studied universal non-locality for decades. And so it's only given for settled science. So we're now coming to a point where the holographic principle, universal non-locality, and this understanding of the deeper nature of information is all coming together to offer us an emergent cosmology that does bring everything together in a very simple way. But it's revealing, instead of a dead universe, a mechanistic universe, a meaningless universe, an emergent understanding of a living and loving universe that meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves as a unified entity. So here we start. This is the next few slides. This is the story of our universe. And so this is the story of us. Because it began so simply, because it began in such an exquisitely fine-tuned, relational, ordered state, it embodies an evolutionary impulse from simplicity to ever greater complexity, leading to us. A primordial arm. Literally, the universe was not transparent to light in those earliest times, but it was to sound. So just as the ancient teachings, the Vedic teachings, other teachings, it began with a primordial arm that sounded throughout the whole of space and time over that first epoch and ushered the first structures of stars into being. Hundreds of millions of years later, within the cauldrons, the alchemical cauldrons of stars, was the nucleosynthesis that again continued that journey of complexity from hydrogen and helium. Eventually, and it's quite a bit more complex story than this, it required generations of stars. It required explosions of stars. It required mergers of stars, but eventually came to all 94 natural elements. And then about 5.5 billion years ago, before our planetary system was formed, within galaxies that were then, hundreds of millions, billions of stars, were forming interstellar clouds of molecular hydrogen. All the nutrients from those generations of stars were ushered into these incredible birthing clouds for then more complexity of planetary systems. And this is a photograph from the James Webb Telescope, the most recent. And that brown, beautiful interacting brown area is an interstellar molecular cloud. It's within that new planetary systems form. And those by then were not just having molecular hydrogen, but ice. And crucially, prebiotic building blocks, the forerunners of DNA and RNA and amino acids and lipids and sugars were all there. And we've discovered them there. So about 5.5 billion years ago, a supernova explosion about 200 light years away from where we are now caused one part of such a molecular cloud to collapse. But it didn't collapse in chaos. It collapsed to create something that looked like this, what's called a protoplanetary disk. And if you can see that right at the center, there's a protostar, a star that's forming. And around it, in those sort of disk areas, are resonant orbits where new planets, birthing planets are. Our planetary system, our sun, our Earth, our whole solar system formed about 5.5 billion years ago in such a proplid. And here we are. And this too is a story that deserves its own feature film, because our early planetary system was not just where we are now. Those resonant orbits were happening, but it was a pretty busy system. There were things coming in and bouncing things around and moving planets around until finally every one of our current planets settled into very, very stable orbits. And of course, our positioning is perfect. Not too hot, not too cold. our beloved planetary home Gaia, is in the habitable zone of our solar system, just right, and born as a water planet. And this is crucial because if you remember that I mentioned that in the interstellar clouds of dust and all these prebiotic, they're like little molecular factories within those interstellar clouds. There was huge amounts of ice, and water is vital for the then onward emergence and complexity of biological organisms. And just to mention, we can come back if questions lead this way, but our sun, sol, our moon, Luna, and Gaia actually are a beautiful harmonic trinity. And there's a fourth member of this intimate family, a being called Thea, who you may not have heard of, but Thea is like the grandmother to Gaia and Luna. And Thea was the mother of the moon goddess Selene in Greek mythology. So she's like rather like the grandmother to our system. I'll come back if anybody's interested. And just to mention, we have the abundance of our planetary home, thanks also not just to that trinity or family, but to what's known as Milankovitch cycles, because our Gaia wobbles on her orbit, her ellipticity around Sol changes, and she also she wobbles around the object precession, but her tilt changes. So this gives us our seasons, and this gives us an incredible home world of variety and environmental and evolutionary potential, and not just her biosphere, because her sentience is throughout what I call her Gaiosphere, her rocks, her minerals, her waters, her atmosphere, as well as her biosphere. And just to, I come back to this because this is such, I think this is so cool. The building blocks of biological life forms were 9 billion years in the making. They go back right to that first moment of our universe and its initial hydrogen and helium, all the way through stars to interstellar clouds, as I've mentioned. When those harbingers of biological life were then able to seed planetary homes, not just such as Gaia, but in the very early days of our solar system, likely Venus and Mars too, and also some moons of Jupiter and Saturn, as we're finding, the DNA and the RNA in each of our cells is throughout the whole of Gaia's biosphere, and it's looking like the whole of our solar system's biosphere. And it's looking like, because it is the best, scientific studies show that DNA is 1 in a million in the sense of the way it's structured in terms of its ability to hold information and then to share information through RNA to create biological beings. Amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, are the fewest and optimum number for the maximum variety. We're finding that as we go back, our universal's intelligence enabled to be right first time at every step of its ongoing evolutionary journey, not just, in planetary systems, but from the very get-go, to be right first time and to have incredible properties that are relational within the very periodic table itself upwards. The DNA in each of our cells, if it was strung out, it's microscopic. We can't see it within a cell. It's so tiny. But when it's pulled out to its full length, it's taller than, certainly than I am, but 2 meters long. With all the cells in our body, each of our body's DNA reaches across the diameter of our solar system. The DNA of all people walking our beloved Gaia now reaches over 10 times the visible diameter of our Milky Way. Our DNA in our cells reconfigures when it's needed to read something, to create a protein. It reconfigures in a 4-level fractal in milliseconds. And unlike my telephone cables, my computer cables, I think every cable any of us ever have to untangle, it never gets tangled. And this of itself is so extraordinary. We could spend an hour just talking about the miracles of DNA. And the crucial thing is DNA is not merely read-only. It is responsive. The intelligence of our cells, the intelligence of our bodies enables read-write capacities so that it can express its genes in different ways to optimize its responses to environmental signals. It's not driven by random mutations. There's an enormous amount of intelligence within each and every one of our cells that reduces such mistakes, as it were, in reads to a minute level, from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in less than 10 billion. So random mutations do not drive biology, which is what we were taught at school. Instead, our evolutionary process is driven proactively and beneficially through a number of mechanisms. One is through the DNA lineage, but even that is absolutely not random. It is optimal, and its optimum is to retain the coherence and the health of the species. So tiny changes, but they're proactively driven to optimize the fit to the environment. And there is no separation between an organism and its environment. It's part of the whole Gaia-sphere. But also through other mechanisms, generational changes from lifestyle changes through epigenetics. But also it can involve rapid, incredibly rapid and fast, what's called horizontal gene transfer. So when there is a collapse or a catastrophic change in the environment, co-evolutionary partnerships can reconfigure in an incredibly quick timescale and major timescale to create a whole new species, whole new clades, as they're known, of organisms to take this evolutionary journey onwards. So Gaia's own continuing emergence is embodied in collaborative and co-evolutionary partnerships, everything co-evolving in that sense as part of that entire Gaia-sphere. So it's our conscious evolution that is now, it seems to me, absolutely key and integrative with Gaia's own evolutionary progress and purpose. That's why it's important. That's why when we've got to this catastrophic moment where we can't go on, which isn't sustainable, that now we're in the process of horizontal meme transfer, because we're talking now about conscious revolution rather than biological evolution. But it is nonetheless, so it's the ideas, the consciousness, our worldview, our awareness that can rapidly change to take us through this conscious revolutionary moment, as opposed to a biological revolutionary moment. So it's remembering who we really are here and now. And what I'm going to run through this, because I really want us to spend our time in question, answer, and exploration. But this emergent understanding of a whole unitive, non-locally unified, multidimensional universe naturally includes supernormal phenomena and attributes. All of these are natural attributes of our individuated awareness and group consciousness, because it's showing us that we can actually co-create consciously with each other through remote viewing, our intentions, telepathy. As we co-create that level of coherence and resonance, this is such a wondrous adventure inviting us into our intuition. Somebody once called our intuition the GPS of our soul, the GPS of our soul. Yes, because it's natural. We are naturally inseparable from our universe. Synchronicity. The old paradigm doesn't have any place for any of these. And synchronicities do not violate the causative flow within space-time. They come in the here and now as wondrous way showers from a holistic, whole, unitive universe. Presentiment, precognition. We're at the bow wave of space-time. This crystallization of potentiality, again, can offer us attunement, insight, wisdom. and naturalizing multidimensional and archetypal realities and communications, coherent group consciousness. My goodness me, we have a universal cosmic wonder that we're only just beginning to tap into. It seems to me that this is the invitation of our universe to consciously evolve through our conscious revolution. And mind and consciousness aren't something we have. This is showing us that mind and consciousness is what we and the whole world are. So by understanding, experiencing, vitally experiencing and embodying unity, we've been given a wondrous heritage of wisdom teachings. The sage, the way of the sage, the way of the understanding, the sacred science that's now coming forward into the leading edge of science. But that leading edge of science now is converging with the heart-centered awareness of the shaman, the experiencing of all life, not just biological life, but the web of life, of universal life, as indeed a web of relations, all our relations, and a seer, the way of the mystic, the revelatory understanding of embodying that. We have examples that go back thousands of years in terms of the sage that are now being recognized, reappreciated, reintegrated into this evolutionary movement forward. The way of the shaman, you know, the way of the Maori, the way of the Aboriginals, the way of the Sami. So many traditions again now being recognized, and the wisdom keepers amongst our Indigenous communities that have held that wisdom for us, our elder brothers and sisters who've held these wisdoms for us. And the way of the seer, the embodying the revelation, axial age spirituality. But now I feel we're talking about a unitive age, and there will be a unitive interspirituality. But that interspirituality realizes that spirituality is not out there. It's a living universe that breathes through us in every moment. So as we do that, we can have the sage-based traditions, which throughout millennia have shown us the fundamental attributes of universal reality: number, geometry, music, astronomy, astrology, all combined as sacred science, now finding their place too in this leading edge and this emergent understanding. Shaman-based attributes, experiencing, interdependence, cycles, but now we understand as spirals of time, and a fundamental realization that we and our universe are inseparable. And embodying seer-based traditions, those key impulses of the axial age, but also the understanding that astrologically, the sentience of our universe and the sentience of our solar system is going through spirals of conscious evolution, of which we are individuated, microcosmic co-creators at this time, as we move from what we've known as the Piscean age into the Aquarian age. And if we'd like to, I'd be delighted to talk about this point of threefold, because for me, each age, even though we name it for its cardinal aspects, it actually also embodies attributes of the prior two ages, just as a wave has its beginning, its peaking, its falling away. So as we move from the Piscean age into the Aquarian age, I would suggest that the cardinal Aquarian essence of the me and the we and the all is coming through that peaking of the Piscean understanding of love, of spirituality and of love, and the falling away of the individuation of the age of Aries and the structures that were actually there through the Taurian, you know, the hierarchical, patriarchal structures. And universal wisdom teachings all seek meaning and purpose. They all recognize these spiritual dimensions of reality. And they generally emphasize the good of the whole. Yes, the individual, but the individual as part of a community, bringing their gifts, bringing their uniqueness to those wider communities, and to integrate inner and outer. What they didn't do that we can now do, and I've just been very brief on it today, is incorporate the evolutionary biology, but the evolutionary understanding of our entire universe into this story. And now what they can do is integrate the path of the sage, offering insights and wisdom. The path of the shaman. The path of the shaman, it seems to me, is vital, because this is the path with which we can heal our dis-ease of separation. We can come to, in our love of our planetary home, Gaia and her multidimensional sentience, we can learn. We can learn as students from her wisdom and her multidimensional, and you know, our universe is multidimensional wisdom as Gaians, which is a whole new relationship, and the path of the seer, by enhancing our natural, intuitive, and supernormal abilities. This is, it seems to me, the potential, the opportunity, the invitation, and the wonder of our conscious revolution. And why here and why now? Because we cannot, it seems to me, go on as we have been with that illusion of separation. And we are being given now, not just the evidence, but we're given the impulse, it seems to me, of a universe whose big breath breathes through our little breaths in every moment. We're given the opportunity now to link up and lift up and go forward together into this wondrous possibility and potential as we go forward. And I'm very appreciative of, I said I'd stop after 45 minutes, so I must stop now. So I'm going to stop on this slide, integrating the three paths of sage, shaman, and seer, and their complementary paths of mind, heart, and purpose, invites us into the embodied wholeness of our divine selves and the realization and whole being of our conscious revolution. It invites us on a very pragmatic level to act local, feel global, and think cosmic. So thank you, everyone, and I'll stop sharing now.
Hi, Jude. I'm just coming on board. Wow, we're all on fire here at the head office. That was just marvelous. Thank you. Thank you. I have so many little questions here, and some have come through. So let's get started. But first of all, I noticed in your title where you spoke of our conscious evolution, you've got the R, the revolution, you've got that highlighted. That seems a really big thing. Can you comment a little bit further on that?
Thank you, Renee. And it is a very big thing. That's why I did it. Because when we talk about evolution, evolution can go in generally 3 speeds. If everything is sort of relatively stable, such as our environment has been from the last ice age, there's actually been very little evolution. You know, things have changed slightly, as Darwin found when he went to the Galapagos Islands and elsewhere. You know, birds develop slightly longer beaks or smaller beaks or whatever to fit their environments, but very little radical evolution. When those Milankovitch cycles go forward, and they go forward over tens or hundreds of thousands of years, the environment changes and ice ages come and go and volcanoes come and go and all the rest of it. Then evolution goes in a faster pace, and there's new species and all of that. But there have been times in Gaia's story when there's been absolutely monumental changes to the environment. And sometimes that's been a sort of a catastrophic event, such as the dinosaurs, such as the asteroid and the dinosaurs. Other times it's been major environmental change. But what that's driven, there's been a collapse of the current, certainly the leading, most complex organisms of that time. But what's happened is that collapse has generated a huge new wave of evolutionary potential. That's how we've moved over time from single-celled organisms to our bodies of 37 plus trillion cells and the ecosystems and everything in the complexity we have. So that is revolutionary. That is revolutionary. So that's why I wanted to add the R, because I'm not talking now about biological revolution so much as conscious revolution. My sense is that this is a time when our awareness is being invited to take a huge leap forward. And it really begins with remembering we're inseparable.
Yeah, and knowing who we are, isn't it?
Knowing who we are. Exactly.
Yeah, that's the really big question. What that points out to me when you spoke about that evolution and how long, like since the beginning of 9 billion years, in actual fact, the universe has taken an awful long time for us, and we're now at a pivotal point, aren't we? Coming in, as you would describe it, as microcosmic co-creators. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, because it's really important now.
It absolutely is, Renee. And you know, when I talk about this whole evolutionary journey of our universe and our conscious planet, starting nearly 14 billion years ago with hydrogen and helium, the hydrogen in our bodies is as old as the universe. It was formed moments after the beginning of our universe. The oxygen, the nitrogen, all the other to make up our biological bodies was born in stars billions of years ago. It then formed into those interstellar clouds of molecular hydrogen and got to the point of being sort of harbingers of amino acids and DNA and RNA, as I mentioned. But it couldn't go any further because that was in interstellar space. It was miraculous. It was marvelous to get to that level of complexity, but it needed planets to go forward. And it needed water planets to be able to birth biological life and that extra complexity that's literally come to us today. So the story of our entire universe is our story. Our story is its story.
It brings a whole new meaning to the mystery of our being, doesn't it? Of who we are. A complete new meaning. So thank you. Thank you. Now I'm going to start working through. I've got a number of questions in various spots. So I will start with the very first one. Please do expand on Thea, the grandmother. That was the first one. Remember we talked about,
I do. I'm so glad this is the first question because most people have not heard of Thea. Had you heard of Thea, Renee?
I had heard of Thea, but the person that asked the question was Tony from Wellington, Tony Weir. She's asked the question. So I'll just put that there.
So Tony, thank you for asking the question. When we go back, can you remember the slide that showed the proplyd, the protoplanetary disk from which our solar system formed? Okay, well, fast forward that a little bit.
Oh, something's happened with the sound. Wait there.
Oh. Yeah, I'm here.
There's no sound.
Can you hear me?
We're just having some problems with the sound. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah,
I can't hear you, Jude, so it might be at your end.
No, Kirsty says I can hear you
Everyone's
both.
got sound.
Everybody's got sound.
No?
Everybody can hear us.
We're
Esther's saying I can hear you both. Melanie's saying it could be just on your end, Renee.
Yes, it's now sorted. So
Excellent.
I think we should go back on that one, just to that Thea, the grandmother.
Of course, happy to. Well, as I said, you remember the slide showing the proplyd, the protoplanetary disk. Well, fast forward that, and you see that our sun has formed in the center of our solar system, and the planets, let's say as we know them now, and there's a bit more complexity to that, especially in the outer planets, but pretty much our planetary home was where we are now. So in the inner solar system, as a rocky planet, so Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars and then the asteroid belt. But there was still a lot of rocks moving throughout the solar system. And we understand that our planetary home at that point was much smaller than she is now, and we didn't have a moon. So our early planetary home was continued to go roughly in the orbit that we are now. But then a being, we want to call it an asteroid, but it was almost a protoplanet itself, called Theia, the size of Mars, we think, came in from the outer solar system and crunched into Gaia before she was Gaia, this protoplanet that we now know as Gaia.
Yeah.
And as Theia came in, she crunched in, but didn't destroy the early planet, but the ejection from that became our moon. So our moon is made up primarily as parts of Theia and also parts of early Gaia, but also Gaia continued to plow into the center of what became Gaia. And because Theia's rocks were heavier than what Gaia's rocks, I'm going to call her Gaia, but she's pre-Gaia, as it were heavier, they're still there. And we have two big, what's called LLRVPs, or blobs, as they're colloquially known, one under the Pacific and one under Africa. And they actually form around the core of Gaia. And we think those are the remnants of Theia. So they're helping to stabilize Gaia, to stabilize Gaia's magnetic field, which is absolutely vital. And at the same time, other remnants of Theia, together with those early parts of Gaia, form our moon, which also stabilizes Gaia, stabilizes our orbit, stabilizes Gaia's ability to nurture biological life forms.
Isn't that wonderful? And just like your grandmother, who can stabilize the family, isn't it? It brings it all.
It is.
It helps stabilize. Yeah, yeah. You did bring up, and just reminded me then, the analogy with the butterfly. And I had a little note on this one. Like, I really loved the analogy. And then you went into turbulence, a birthing process. So it's not pretty at the moment, is it? In our world and in many places and organizations, a lot of things are coming up kind of to be healed in a way, isn't it? Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. Yeah, very much so. I mean, I talk of us having, and I'm not blaming or shaming this, because I think the last few thousand years have been a journey of us really moving more and more into our individuated sense of self. But that journey has gone to a point where we've almost lost the understanding that, yes, we are unique and we're inseparable. So we've moved into that perception of a worldview of separation. And of course, the mechanistic science that really flowed through the Industrial Revolution, but it's still the general worldview, regardless of all the technologies and all the rest of it. So our perception of separation has, it seems to me, brought us to a sense of collective trauma. And so as we wake up and as we realize and as we heal ourselves from this dis-ease of separation, then that healing process is absolutely fundamental for our conscious revolution. And they go hand in hand. And I think there is, and so the polarization is almost like the, when we, in our own lives, when we go on this journey of inner discovery, sometimes things have to break down to break through.
Well, yeah, like the phoenix in a way.
Like the phoenix, all esoteric traditions talk about that point. I don't personally think we have to, but I know I have in my own life. It's been my breakdowns where I've tried to hold on and hold on and hold on to the pain of holding on is greater than the pain of letting go and going into the unknown. And I think we're at that point, we're trying to hold on rather than let go and let God and just flow into this, because I so deeply trust this invitation of the universe. And so I have no sense of holding on to what was, because I'm so joyous, thrilled for what can be if we're prepared to let go and let God.
Let go. I mean, that's a big step. isn't it? Like for most people, there comes a point where you kind of have to be taken to the wall in some way or another to let go. But if we can keep that vision of from me to we to all, because that's really where we're moving, isn't it? It's taking us.
It is, but that's a really interesting point, because one of the evolutionary leaders circle gatherings I was at years and years ago, that very point came forward, and there was a whole series of exploration around that, and we came to a perspective that it was not me to we to all, it was me and we and all. Because people had this fear of losing themselves, their sense of self, which of course has been so hard won in our collective journey over the last few centuries and thousands of years. But when we understand that it's expanding our sense of self, our me, to we, to include we and all, and that's the Aquarian impulse. I mean, astrologically, that's the Aquarian impulse flowing through us, it seems to me.
Far more inclusive, isn't it? Like them thinking we're leaving a part of ourselves behind.
Exactly.
And in actual fact, we're waking up. Really, we're becoming more conscious.
Very much so. And I think that's the really important point, because the me too we, in an odd sense, continues this sense of separation. But when we appreciate that it's the me and the we and the all, as you say, it's this remembering that we are unique and yet inseparable. And it's giving each of us, empowering each of us to bring our uniqueness to the, to the wholeness, to the service of the whole. That's what I'm really seeing.
It brings through, and you bring this quality through, that quality of joy that is in that. Like, in a way, when you're doing things for others, there is a deep joy, and we kind of forget about some things when that joy comes through, isn't it? I mean, that's part of us. We're not meant to be this sad being that's struggling. Ultimately, it's that flowering of who we really are. Is that,
That's so beautiful. Yes, so beautifully put. I agree. I was having a conversation the other day. I was a guest in a podcast, and people were talking, and the host was talking about this, and I was talking about multidimensional communications and engagements, which is such a wondrous and, for me, natural. It is natural for us. And I was saying that, in my experience, when I'm miserable, the beings in other realms don't tend to show up, but when I'm joyful, they do. And he said, well, what about when you're really, really, really low? And I said, then they show up. But when I'm grumpy, so if I'm really in need, in really need, then, they come very close in my experience. When we ask for help, when we call out for help, it comes in that regard in so many different ways. But if we're just a bit grumpy and annoying and annoyed with ourselves and miserable, it's less easy, because the vibration that we have is lower. And so when we raise our sense of joy and love, then everything is much easier in so many ways. So I just want to say that, but I didn't want to I wanted to differentiate between when we're sort of low because things are turbulent, things are challenging, but when we can find that sense of joy together, that can bring us through. And when we really are in desperate states, and we are in many ways, as you say, I believe we have so much help at the moment.
It's there. It's just, I sometimes find turning inwards and finding that courage and that strength to be able to pull yourself out of that space. And I can always remember my grandfather, he used to say this Zen saying, it's actually Richard's dad, so my father-in-law, he used to say, what was it? Let go, pass on, and be free. And so often something's happening, I'll just say, and it's in my cookbook. I quickly wrote it in the cookbook, but it's one that's very helpful, especially when you're feeling something. I got to pick myself up because someone else can't pick you up for you. People like being around that joyful energy. That it's almost magnetic, isn't it? Pulls you in a way.
It does. And there are so many ways that we can come together as communities. I mean, one of the things that if I'd have had longer, we could have explored is what invites you into your community. I mean, we live in a little village. We have a village hall. We have coffee mornings. We have concerts. We have harvest festivals. We have lots of community activities, and that sort of sense of being part of a community offers so much well-being and whole being if we can do that.
Yeah.
But I think part of, certainly in some communities, we've tended to isolate ourselves. So when we can reach out, when we can offer a helping hand, when we can sort of say, oh, this sounds interesting, I'll join this.
Yeah.
We go litter picking as a group and laugh the whole time, and just clear a room
Wonderful.
of litter. And it's so joyous. It's such a lovely down-to-earth thing to do. And we do it together. And then we go to somebody's house afterwards for a cup of tea and a piece of cake and
Which
tell
is
stories.
obviously the great bit. That's right. But it's just being with the community, isn't it? Working together for that purpose. And then there's obviously cake and tea at the end. But
Always
you're doing
cake and tea at the
something.
end in our place.
Yes, I can imagine. I can imagine. Now, I will jump through a few comments here because we've taken a little bit of time, which has been wonderful, but I'll come through here. Wonderful presentation. Could you comment on the role of the Akashic field in the storage and evolution of information in the cosmos?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the ancient Vedic tradition was so profoundly insightful. I took my wording of the big breath from, the same perspective. And also, the Akashic field, also something called Indra's net, because Indra's net also spoke of a wholly relational universe. So the Akashic field is essentially that holographic boundary of what we call space-time, what we call our universe, where all the information that's ever been manifested and expressed through the whole story of our universe is held. So that is what the ancients would have referred to as the Akashic record. So it's not just the Akashic record of human recollection, it's the story of our universe from that very first moment. So everything that's been essentially embodied or manifested within our universal story is held on that holographic boundary, which is why space has to expand. Because if it
And
didn't,
that's
that
that
boundary would
2D.
not be able to incorporate more information.
And that's that 2D thing you spoke of on the boundary, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one dimension of space and one dimension of time. So that's why space-time works as it does within space-time. And that's why that's why the holographic boundary, actually reduces 3 dimensions of manifested appearance of space into 1 dimension, and 1 dimension of manifested time into 1 dimension. So you have space-time on the holographic boundary, which is its fundamental nature as a 2-dimensional surface boundary, but the way it projects holographically, it projects into the, up, down, sideways, front, back, and time of our experience within it. And all the information from that very first moment, which has been increasing, of course, the information content has been increasing ever since, has required space to expand to accommodate that. So that holographic boundary gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So more and more and more information has been expressed, embodied, experienced, evolved within space-time.
And it seems like we're going faster. Is that relevant?
Yes, because interestingly enough, our universe space doesn't expand at a constant rate. It either accelerates or it decelerates. And originally it accelerated, then it decelerated, and now it's accelerating again. And interestingly, the last 5 billion years or so is when that deceleration became an acceleration. So, yeah, and what that is suggesting is that the evolutionary impulse from simplicity to complexity has speeded up. And I would suggest that that's with the formation of planetary systems and individuated consciousness being able to be expressed and embodied in biological organisms.
Wow. Okay. Actually can't get over the whole that big thing. Now, I'm just going to ask people, those that have put any questions in the chat, would you be able to copy them over to the Q&A for me? Because I can't go into two spaces. Now, I'll just move on to this next one. It's from John Borsman's in Auckland here, which you've met, John. He says, thank you for the beautiful sharing. It is very powerful and talks to the Gaia consciousness within him. To be in the consciousness is our goal, I would think. However, we are in a time when we as humans see ourselves and being separate from the Gaia consciousness and this exploiting of Gaia that we see. Do you see a way forward for a more positive world and then a stronger connection with the universal oneness? That's a wonderful question.
It's a wonderful question, John. And before I answer it, I just want to answer a comment I think Lynn put in the chat about have I written about this. Lynn, all of this is in the two books, The Cosmic Hologram and The Story of Gaia. But I would say the evolutionary story, which really, you know, I hope speaks to our hearts, is in The Story of Gaia. So it's the story of Gaia, the big breath and the conscious journey, the evolutionary journey of our conscious planet. So it's the story of Gaia, and you should be able to get that, I hope. But going back to John's question, absolutely, John. I mean, with all of this turbulence, the great amount of my focus and efforts at the moment is taking this understanding forward into action. So in other words, waking up to remember we're inseparable, waking up to sort of, you know, be invited to grow up, to be Gaians, realizing that we are microcosmic co-creators of a living, evolving, loving universe. What does that mean in terms of action and transformational change? So I'm working with a whole raft of folks who all come from this, what we're calling unitive perspective. And of course, this community is part of that. But I'm working with leading change makers across economics, education, governance, security, and also artificial intelligence. And I'll explain that in a minute. Because what the United Nations have, and the Secretary General have called for is what he's calling deep and rapid transformation. So in the run-up to an event in New York in September called the Summit of the Future, and what the United Nations have published called the Pact for the Future, there's a realization that we cannot go on as we are. We have to transform literally, deeply and rapidly and transformationally. And so what we're doing is coming from this unitive perspective, which of course is taking the whole in terms of moving it forward in action, in love in action. So, for example, in economics, we're putting forward how we can move from the economics based on this old mechanistic perspective to reform, to basically to stop digging, you know, stop digging. When you're deep in a hole, stop digging. How could we do that? Things like debt relief, stopping things like HFT, financial transactions. There's lots of things that we could stop doing now that would help stop the digging. Reform, reset, move more and more into regenerative economics, which a lot of people are leading the way for. And that of itself suggests that we're just regenerating, we're restoring. But the leading edge of regenerative economics is an economist called John Fullerton, who I'm working with, but also many others from this perspective, that's taking it into an economics of living systems, and he is defining living as universal, so not just biological. So Gaiosphere, Gaian, living as a planetary systems. So we're moving that forward, but we're moving it forward along with changing the worldview, because you have to, because if you change your behaviors, you change your worldview, it's all in train, to ultimately a unitive worldview, which is what we've been sharing today, with a unitive narrative, which is we've already done, into a unitive age. And so unitive economics and education and all the naturally are all part of this. So that's the movement that's going forward, and more and more people are joining that. I was at an event yesterday called the Jaipur Literary Festival, which is a big deal. I didn't know it was as big a deal as it is, but at the British Library in London. And I was presenting essentially this. And it was so well received because people, I think, in our hearts know, we just want something that offers us authentic hope. We just want something that invites us to come together, to realize that we have far greater in common that divides us, that realizes that we are microcosms of a living, loving, evolutionary universe. We are inseparable. And what does that mean? And that means many voices, one heart. It means, how do we find in our own expertise, our own interest, our own passion, how can we serve this? And to answer that invitation for ourselves, and then come together to lift up and link up together.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's that heart-centered awareness for us to nurture, isn't it, in our own lives?
It is.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll mention, another project I'm involved with, is storytelling. We are a storytelling species. So our worldview is founded and expressed through narratives. And narratives can be good, bad, or indifferent. But what we're saying with this understanding is offering a unitive narrative. And so one of the other projects I'm involved with is I'm co-producing a short film called A Radical Guide to Reality, which is the story of this. It's the evolutionary story. It's the universal story of this and ours. 14 minutes, so it's a short film. We're going to be offering an educational wraparound for 13 and 14-year-old students and their educators. But also we're going to offer it on YouTube for everybody. It's free for everybody, and we're translating it into 14 languages. So we're so anybody.
I just love you going to the teenagers. Wonderful, wonderful. 13, 14-year-olds. Great place to start right there.
It is, but it's for everybody, because a lot of us stopped learning science when we were 13 or 14-year-olds.
Oh,
true. So by offering it on YouTube, it's for everybody in pretty much every language. That's coming out in September. So I'll let everybody know, and please feel free to share it in every which way. We'll share the educational wraparound for any educators that want to sort of continue, like who's Gaia and what's the big breath and what are fractals and this, that, and the other. And get the popcorn in and the ice cream, Kirsty. Don't forget the ice cream. but so for everybody on YouTube with all of those languages, and for 13, 14-year-olds with an educational wraparound for teachers as well. So working with leading educators for this as well.
That's wonderful. We'll send that out once we, close to the time. We'll let everyone know and just remind them. So that's great. Now, I realise we're coming to a close. I'll just cover a couple of others. Now, I think we answered some of Lynn's, but do you think there's some general overall plan in all this, an absolute universal consciousness, which we've spoken of a bit, and to what aim? Any further comment there? That was from Lynn Hume. She's asked that.
Thank you, Lynn. That's a fabulous question. Well, when I started to write the story of Gaia, or the story of Gaia wrote me, I feel, I really became ever more aware that our universe doesn't just exist and evolve as a living, loving, unitive entity, a great thought form. It actually embodies an evolutionary impulse to evolve from simplicity to ever greater levels of complexity and individuation and self-awareness. And so it's rather like a whole universe learning to know itself through these individuated expressions of its entirety and its sentience. And it's almost like a human body. When we're born as a baby, we continue as a whole being, as it were, but we learn about ourselves through our experiences through life. And I'm seeing this as rather like a universe soul being born as a baby universe, and then learning about itself, its innate sentience, but evolving that sentience through its individuated expressions, rather like ourselves within us. So that's the way I'm sensing it. And so as a finite thought, because our universe, the best we know, understand now from the leading edge of science, is our universe is a finite thought. It was born 13.8 billion years ago. it's probably coming now to, well, middle age, perhaps another 10 billions or whatever. We don't know for sure, but that's when we look at the new science of infodynamics and that third law of infodynamics, where, you know, temperature and information content are inversely proportional. So our universe began its hottest state, its lowest informational state. As time's gone on and space expanded, the temperature's dropped, the information's gone up. There will come a point where the temperature gets to absolute zero. And we're at 2.7 degrees above that at the moment. So, you know, there is a timeline here, which is absolutely appropriate. But it's almost as though the wholeness of cosmic mind, the infinite and eternal mind of the cosmos, has thought forms that are universes. So from that unity becomes a thought form where that unity is expressed in diversity and ultimately complexity. And then ultimately, at the end of the life cycle, every expression, every experience, every aspect of love and joy and all of it within that universe can be then released to the eternal and infinite mind.
Absolutely wonderful. I've got Peter standing in front of me with his hands up in the air. He's so just imagining that release of joy and so forth. So really the potential is infinite, really.
Ultimately, because everything within space-time is finite, but we are also part of an infinite, eternal cosmos. And so, you know, the multidimensionality of our journey, I mean, you know, our journey in the Akashic, we were talking about the Akashic records, the story of our universe is billions upon billions of years old. And, you know, in a sense, we are part of that journey. We are part of that journey. It is our journey.
It's in ourselves, isn't it?
It's in ourselves. It's in every part of who we are and our potential to continue that journey through our conscious revolution. And who knows where that will take us? But I hope, I truly hope that everyone who's joined us today is saying yes to this invitation.
I'm sure if they all shouted out, it's exactly what they'll be saying. So thank you. I will leave it there. There's lots of people. Sounds wonderful, beautifully said. Thank you for the great talk. Exciting to see the bigger lens and the view to nurture ourselves within the whole. That's from Esther in Brisbane, actually, I think she is. Bringing in an acknowledgement of the Indigenous wisdom, so important, and there are many parallels with the ageless wisdom, which I saw it as pure ageless wisdom coming through there. So I've got loads more thank yous, just keep popping up. So I think we'll leave it there because you've given us an amazing thing, a gift to take, something to reflect upon. But a big thank you to you, Jude, and so lovely to talk to you again. And, you know, I just want to thank everyone that tuned in from around the country, from Australia, and a couple other places overseas as well. So thank you very much for everyone. And thank you for hopping up so early and getting organised on your Sunday morning, isn't it? Yes, yeah. Instead of out walking in the park and having a cup of tea at the cafe.
No, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone. Lots of love.